Sorry, I was just having some issues there with my recording button. Okay, so just a few other points. As I said, there is a theme with Aquarius, Leo, and the other thing that you will notice when you're looking at eclipse seasons is that there are very particular polarity points emphasized throughout the year, such as Leo Aquarius for this year, for instance. And you know that within itself is quite important because it's raising the energy of those two archetypal expressions in your own life. It's clearly trying to get our attention into those different archetypal forces for different reasons. As I said, Leo is the heart energy, Aquarius is that humanitarian component of us. Talk about more about that in a minute when I just talk a little bit more about the solar eclipse we just had. So just a distinction between lunar and solar eclipses, because out of these 5 eclipses, we are talking about lunar and solar. Now, the solar eclipse is a new moon, and the lunar eclipse is a full moon. So new moon is sun and moon together, and full moon is sun and moon in opposition to each other in the heavens. However, the reason eclipses occur is because of what's called the nodes, okay, the moon's nodes. So when we're looking at a solar eclipse, the sun and moon are conjunct the node, and likewise with the lunar eclipses as well, the nodes are there. If there's no nodes there, there's no eclipse, because we have a new moon and full moon every month, right? So if eclipses occurred during every new and full moon, then we'd be having eclipses every single month, at the beginning and the end. That's not the case. The reason is because it is the nodes intersecting with the sun and the moon and the earth that create this experience of eclipses. Now, solar eclipses have always had a pretty bad reputation through the years, and I'm talking, way back a couple of thousand years ago even. So they were looked upon as a bad omen, as it were, but when we think about that in the context of 1,000, 1,500 years ago, then, consciousness was very different in the human race then as to what it is now on a number of different levels. So as we've evolved, we've also evolved our consciousness and our understanding around these events and these experiences, and our own psychology and our own psychic energies and so forth. But nevertheless, solar eclipses do seem to bring about circumstances and events that appear to be out of our control and appear to just come out of the blue, totally unrelated to anything in our life. And the reason that is the case is because solar eclipses, if you think about a solar eclipse, what is it? It's the sun and moon together. So there's a blackness, right? There's a darkness there, implying the unconscious component within us, the what Carl Jung calls the shadow side, the shadow self, which we all have. The shadow side and shadow self lies dormant within all of us, and you could say with eclipses can get very easily triggered and activated, particularly if we are out of touch with our shadow side and disassociated or disconnected with it. Therefore, when we are disconnected with it, then the solar eclipse comes along, and what it does is it shines the torch or the spotlight into our darker forces and brings them up. And if you are if you're totally disconnected with these elements, these psychic components of your being, and have very little awareness of life, your own life, then the typical experience will be to experience a solar eclipse as a fated event out there, which is really just a reflection of your own psyche and shadow side and darker forces that are not being confronted, are not being worked through, are not being resolved, are not being understood. So they're just being suppressed and kept in a space that seems to be out of reach. So solar eclipse comes along and just goes, there you go, I'm just going to shine some light on that part of you and place it out there and have you have a look. And you're looking at yourself, because you're looking at an event of circumstances that specifically affect you, relate to you. So it is about you. And it takes a lot of awareness and consciousness to have that kind of perspective and understanding, because the typical response is for people to blame others, right? When something terrible happens to them, the first thing to do is to find fault and blame out there. It's very few people that will turn it back onto themselves and try and understand it from their own sort of creation, if you like, their own taking responsibility as much as they can, and so forth. So the solar eclipse brings up the shadow, unconscious, hidden aspects of ourselves, essentially, and when it does that, it instead of looking for blame, the better thing we can do is take some responsibility and look at, well, what is it that you can learn through this experience? What is it that needs to be changed or transformed or reviewed or understood better, and so forth? That's the most positive thing one can take out of a solar eclipse event. But in truth, solar eclipse, if they hit hard, they can wipe people out. And there's been many cases where people have been wiped out from the solar eclipse. I don't want to sound too negative and make it all gloom and doom, but it is a reality. And, I'm very fascinated by eclipses, so I follow them in a very committed way, you could say, in my own life and just collectively. And I've seen through the years many, many examples where people, here's another good way to frame how a solar eclipse impacts us and why. It's almost, as I said, it's the shadow unconscious components within us that are not integrated, so therefore suppressed and then ultimately projected. And the other way of looking at a solar eclipse is, you can say, when a person can be going along in life and doing all the right things, and then somewhere near an eclipse, a solar eclipse, that solar eclipse triggers something in that person's psyche that, let's just say, makes them take a particular course of action, which was really out of the blue for them and unusual and deemed as wrong, but they just did it. And then the solar eclipse ends up basically destroying their life, as it were, because the choice that they made has really, really severe consequences, for example. So that's just an example of, a person appearing to be doing all the right things and makes a pretty drastic decision around that eclipse time because something's been triggered in that person's chart, and then you have these very severe consequences. So there's that, which is basically showing us that it's not a random event that just happened and that person just spontaneously made this, crazy, insane decision. It's clearly it's something that's been triggered from inside the person. It's the dark shadow side that is not integrated. You know, when we don't integrate our shadow and embrace it and understand it and have a relationship with it and work with it and all that sort of stuff, then we project it out there. So then everybody else out there or everything else is our shadow. So the evil that we see out there, if you like, and the judgments that we have, you know, on so many people for so many things and so forth, you could say is our own shadow being projected. Because if we have this healthy balance within us, we with our shadow self and our conscious self, you could say, we don't need to project our shadow dark stuff out there. You know, we hold it in here and we keep tabs on it. We're conscious on how we're operating and how we're living in our life. So that's the kind of general sort of essence of the solar eclipse and why it brings up at times quite devastating results for people. It doesn't have to be, you know, the end of the world, so to speak, because people have an opportunity to apply awareness and consciousness to the situation, the conditions, and the adjustments or decisions that need to be made subsequently. So there is an opportunity to recover or redeem, if you like, just purely more from the point of view of your evolution and growth and consciousness. Now, lunar eclipses, on the other hand, connect to the moon, which is the past. So, actually, I'd just like to read what Dimitri George has taken from Dane Rudyard in terms of how he describes or makes a really great definition of solar and lunar and the distinction between the two. And I've really touched on one with talking about the sun, but let me just read this to you anyway, because it is really, really interesting. Dane Ruddy has said that at the new moon solar eclipse, the present is blotted out by the past, while at the full lunar eclipse, the past is obscured by the present. And then she goes on to say, this statement suggests that a solar eclipse, the sun, which represents our consciousness awareness, when obscured, allows the forces of the past, which lie buried in the unconscious as psychic complexes, to be seen, confronted, and experienced with the possibility of integrating these previously unconscious energies into the present awareness, which is what I was just saying about the solar eclipse representing our shadow side. So something happens when the solar eclipse takes place. It's like something moves out of the way for something else to come through. And that something else that's coming through is that shadow side, that darker component to our being, the unconscious psychic impressions, memories, and so forth. Now, then she goes on to say, during a lunar eclipse, it is the past, symbolized by the moon, which is obscured and can be released. In the absence of the conditioning of the past, the reason she's saying that is because the moon represents the past and it is our conditioned past, essentially. So that's why the moon represents our security. You know, it's what makes us feel safe, which connects to conditioned past that we've retained, you know, in our memory body, in our emotional bodies. So let me just start that again. In the absence of the conditioning of the past, the possibility emerges of meeting experiences in a new manner. So the full moon illuminates. That's the literal meaning of the full moon. It's that illumination. But in the case of the lunar eclipse, this illuminating experience is not like the solar eclipse where it brings about, you know, pretty dark, intense, uncomfortable, terrible encounters or experiences at times. The lunar eclipse is more about our inner life and our emotional life and our emotional body. So there's something about, you know, the lunar eclipse basically shining light for you, allowing you to see things with much more awareness, um, regarding your emotional nature and thoughts that you have about that. So, you know, full moon it's the mirror, you know, the mirror that you look at. So when you're looking at a mirror, you can see yourself 100% clearly, right? Without a mirror, there's, you know, there's a sense that you're there. You can kind of see certain part. I'm just testing. The no mirror is a solar eclipse, no awareness, right? And the mirror is the full moon. It's that complete illumination. You can see everything if you're looking right at it. So the moon allows us to, you know, to have more awareness and clarity over something that we've pretty much been cultivating and working with anyway, and very much on an emotional inner level. Because the awareness is there, inherently already there, um, it doesn't manifest as something, you know, that comes out of the blue, or that's a shock to you like a solar eclipse does, because there's awareness already there and it's something you're working with. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to read that. Now, if we think about the solar eclipse that just happened, yeah, so just two words that you can, you know, just nail the suppose interpretation or definition of solar lunar. So solar is unconscious, lunar is conscious. Yeah, that's one way you can describe it as well. All right, so yeah, and just one other point. I've kind of touched on this, but I just want to, I suppose, hone in on it a little bit more. When a solar eclipse takes place and it hits something off in your chart, and therefore it has some pretty strong effects in your life, it's usually because you're not in alignment with what you need to be in alignment with. So consider that as well, you know, when you're thinking about the eclipses and what it's bringing up for you. What is it that you need to be more in alignment with for yourself? And also, it's about being congruent, you know, living an authentic, congruent, you know, life to what is authentic and congruent for you, essentially, because that's a different thing for every single person. But it's about that authenticity, you know, that's really, really important. If we're not being authentic, and we're living an incongruent sort of life with what we say and what we do, in other words, then, you know, the eclipse will really rattle and shake you, so to speak. Now, going back to the solar eclipse we just had, which was in Cancer, you know, Cancer is a water sign, right? It's a yin feminine sign, and it's cardinal in quality, and it's ruled by the moon. It's a very, very sensitive eclipse that we've just had. You know, it's just all water. And what does water represent within us? It represents the unconscious past, you can say. It represents our emotional body. It represents wanting to feel secure when we feel quite insecure. It's the dimension that takes us in and deeper, within ourselves. Cancer particularly is about the ego. It's about the self-image, security, as I said. It's about protection, feeling protected or wanting to protect. It's the mother, family, clan, ancestors, all of that. The inner dimension to life, the everything that encompasses the emotional world. But there's an incredible insecurity attached to Cancer. Now, Cancer is the first water sign, which is one of the reasons it's so incredibly insecure. It hasn't actually formed in its body yet. It's the first encounter, experience with water, with emotion. So it's like baby stages of the emotional realm and life, learning about the emotional body and just all the various emotions that we feel. If you think about a little child who reacts quite strongly in an emotional manner to a situation, usually when they feel threatened or when they're not feeling nurtured, or anyway, there's countless examples. But if you think about that small child, that's Cancer energy. That's that Cancer feeling threatened or insecure or unsafe or not protected or not nurtured. It's that. And that's another reason why Cancerians can be quite clingy, like the crab. You think about the crab in the sea; it has those claws, and it carries his little house on his back. He has that kind of security around him, if you like. All these components of every sign, for that matter, they weren't created accidentally. Pretty interesting when you start to break everything down and unpack it. So Cancer is a very insecure sign by its very nature and essentially seeks security. So here we have this massive eclipse in Cancer opposite Pluto. Now, there's probably a million different interpretations with regards to how many people have touched on this. And there'll be some parallels and similarities between all astrologers, because the basic archetypal principles are there regardless of your perspective or my perspective. So the keywords that I just discussed are really keywords that connect to the archetypal energy of Cancer. So this eclipse was a very, 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 very emotional eclipse. And being opposed by Pluto is like that vulnerability that Cancer, the archetypal sign of Cancer, that energy of Cancer is very vulnerable. All water signs are vulnerable because water is vulnerable. In other words, emotions make us feel vulnerable, at times. It cannot be any other way. But vulnerability doesn't imply weakness. A lot of people interpret or relate to that word vulnerability as it being a flaw or a weakness, when in fact it's not. It's a strength. But it takes great courage to expose our vulnerabilities. We generally put layers and layers and layers on ourselves and keep those vulnerabilities very well hidden with our masks. But, when you've got Pluto opposite the eclipse in Cancer, Pluto is exposing those vulnerabilities, you could say. It's exposing our deepest emotional insecurities. So the light is shining in that Cancerian archetype within you, within all of us. And where our vulnerabilities and insecurities reside, and what it is about that, what it is about our insecurities, our vulnerabilities, our emotional life that is really at a point that needs to basically transform, to put it very, very simply. Because Pluto, quite apart from being the soul, Pluto is the agent of transformation. It is the planet that, when it comes along, whether it's through a solar eclipse, lunar eclipse, transits, progressions, etc., Pluto literally changes a person's life. Pluto is not about going for a walk in the park. It's not about flowers and sunshine. It's about the deepest, darkest components of ourself that, for the most part, lie unconscious. And here we have Pluto in this opposition to the solar eclipse being in Cancer. So it's basically saying, I really want you to feel that vulnerability, to feel exposed on that level, and to feel raw, and to have a look at all of that. And what is it that needs to be healed, deeply, deeply healed? What is it that needs to be released? What is it that is going to create a deeper sense of security for you? All these sorts of questions, I think, are the questions that this particular eclipse has probably raised for all of us, really, just in different ways, right? Because, again, don't forget, in the case of the eclipse that I'm talking about now, then, well, you need to be looking at, where is Cancer Capricorn in your birth chart? So those two houses, that axis is being hit off, was hit off, and will still be affected by this solar eclipse in Cancer. So look at that area of life. Is it the second and eighth house? Is it the first and seventh? Is it the fourth and the 10th? What is it? Whatever area it is, look at both houses. It's drawing in that polarity, that axis, those archetypal energies. That's where you're going to see this energy affecting you personally, or triggering something, or stimulating something. Not an easy energy at all, not an easy eclipse. Probably, in my opinion, it's been the most difficult one for this year. And we're still really right in it, because it only happened a few days ago. And even Bernadette Brady says in her book that the energy of eclipses can be really intense and stressing and triggering that polarity in your chart for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So here we have Pluto involved in this eclipse, and Pluto is relentless. Pluto doesn't give you ice creams and flowers. Pluto gets you to go into that underworld, the underground, your unconscious, in other words, and it forces you to look, to take a long, hard look at yourself and what's going on there. And it doesn't let up, until you've done it. We have to do it. This is kind of you could almost say it's the sacred work that we're doing on ourselves, because what are we all doing here on this planet? We're all trying to better understand ourselves and life, and evolve and become more conscious. That's what we're trying. Why are we trying to do that? Because we want to have a better life. We want to be, a better person. We want to give more love. We want to, all these sorts of things, provided that's the path that you're on, of course. So, yeah, so this eclipse has been really intense. So, I would really be encouraging people to do some, really conscious self-care, um, when when your emotional body is distressed and disturbed, it can impact a lot of areas of life, because it can impact basically just how you're functioning on a day-to-day basis. It can then impact how you're relating with people. So therefore, the relationships you have, it can impact how you're performing at work. A number of different areas will be impacted by this, because when the emotional body is stirred, um, there's a sense of, you know, it's if you think about clear water, just kind of being still and tranquil. That's, I guess you could say, that peaceful sense that we can have at times, right? And everything is fairly clear, you could say, when the water is not disturbed, right? And it's transparent and you can see. And I guess when you can see and when it's transparent, it gives you a sense of control in some kind of way. Now, the opposite to that would be to have disturbed water, murky water, where there's just been, massive thunderstorms, for instance, and everything's sort of churned up, and there's just stuff everywhere, and you don't really know what's where and what's going on. Well, that's the emotional body being stirred, triggered and disrupted. That's what this solar eclipse in Cancer has done. It's been disturbed, ruffled, rattled, um, because of Pluto, because Pluto will smash through the false bullshit, sort of quite simply. It'll smash through the mask and the facade and the things that the ego tries to put in place to protect itself. Pluto will just see through all that and smash all that through. So it can leave one feeling very exposed, very very vulnerable, um, very emotional. Nothing wrong with any of this, by the way. It's just not an easy passage, you or impasse, as we would say in the world of psychology. It's not an easy impasse, but it's a necessary one, or this eclipse wouldn't have happened. And if it has affected you, I'm not saying it's affected every single person on the planet. I can't say that because I can't speak to every single person and find out their experience. But I'm assuming that it has affected a lot of people. And I can see that just from the people that I speak to and, social media, etc. So I guess the message is, if you were to allow this to open you up, you can do some wonderful transformative work through this. But it's not easy. It's that whole death rebirth, which is what Pluto brings up every time. Pluto will take something away, as it were, but it'll bring something in its place, you could say. So something must die for something to be reborn. That's the energy with this eclipse, and very much linking to our emotional body and all our insecurities and vulnerabilities, for that matter. So in short and in brief, that's my message of this eclipse. So I would be doing a lot of self-care, as I said, meditation, steam sauna, dry sauna, spa, yoga, resting, just, or whatever it is you like that is in that kind of field or form that gives you a sense of comfort, nurture, and safety, and so forth. Because you don't necessarily have to just kind of go through this you know, as if you're going into a volcano. You can put things around you and in place to help you through the process. And in fact, I think that's important and probably wise, because if you're a parent or if you're employed or whatever the case, we all have responsibilities in life. So it's not necessarily easy for somebody to just go, you know what, I'm just going to withdraw and shut everybody out for 2 weeks. Some people are in the position to do that, but a lot of people are not. So it's important to recognize, you know, the context of where we're at in our life as well, and what's reasonable, you know, for us to undertake and so forth. But things like meditation and going for a steam sauna and doing some yoga, pretty much anyone can do that, because quite excluding the steam sauna, you can do yoga and meditation in your own home. You don't even have to pay somebody. You can just do it in the comfort of your own home, and so forth. The other eclipse that we're about to go into, 27th of July, which is a lunar eclipse, is in Aquarius, and then the final eclipse of this year is on the 11th of August, and that's the solar eclipse in Leo. So the Leo-Aquarius polarity archetypal energies have been greatly emphasized this year, and they were last year as well, because remember, we had that great all-American, they called it the American solar eclipse. But anyway, that very powerful total solar eclipse where, you know, in certain parts of the world you could see that, and it was spectacular. I didn't get to see it, but those of you who did, I'm envious of you. Anyway, that eclipse, you know, was in Leo, as we know. So the Leo-Aquarius polarity has carried through this year with 4 eclipses, 4 out of the 5. And just very briefly before I just complete this video for today, it's more energy around, I think, asking each of us to, you know, what is Leo? It's the heart. Leo rules the heart, right? So it's about activating our heart energy, the core heart energy that is so blocked for so many people. You know, a lot of people have heart attacks because their heart is just so blocked emotionally. So it's important for us to activate our heart energy, which is that pure unconditional love. That is, you know, there's a stream of divine infinite love and consciousness that is connected to our heart energy, our heart center, the heart chakra. But if we suppress and block, and because of being hurt or scared, and, you know, all those things, which is understandable, I'm not saying it's not, but to keep it blocked is, we can't be authentic. How can we be authentic if we can't have an open heart? So, you know, the heart activation is being, you know, strongly called for on a collective level. And that makes sense when you look at the state of the world in a number of different ways, and just how little heart energy is given and offered. You know, the world in very large ways is so dominated by the left brain, which is an overload of information, which is all connected to the lower chakras. And control and power and money, which again is all connected to the lower chakras. So, you know, Leo, heart center, heart activation, heart energy, these eclipses are drawing our attention to that. The Aquarius, the polarity point, is about that awareness and humanitarian and humility, say, and our individuation process as well, or evolution. Individuation, not individuality, there is a difference. And individuation is a key term, again, that derives from Carl Jung and used in EA astrology. So individuation is seen through sign Aquarius and the planet Uranus. But just in terms of what that actually means, it's related to, you could say, our evolution, essentially. It's how we are individuating through our evolutionary path and journey. Another way of saying that is, you know, our consciousness evolving, right? So Leo Aquarius is highly emphasized through these eclipses all throughout this year, and it was last year as well. So it's to me, it says, you know, we need to develop a greater sense of humanitarian collective consciousness and awareness in unison, as opposed to the apparent divisions and separations that basically just create conflict. We need to find a way to because we're all one big family, and we're all part of the same. We're all part of this planet, and we've all come from the same energy and entity and consciousness and space in other dimensions. So if, you know, to just to take a step back and just realize that and remember that, and, you know, have that awareness and consciousness about humanitarian care for everything on the planet, including the animal kingdom. Very, very important. And the heart center, you know, in the heart center, Leo, when that's activated, there's so much potential, so much love that can radiate from that space within us. When it's blocked, you know, then anger, fear, greed, paranoia, selfishness, division, conflict, power struggles, all that stuff and so much more is right there on the surface when the heart is not activated, because the ego takes over, and the ego is always living in the fear that it will be annihilated, period. So you can see how important it is for this Leo Aquarius energy to be activated on an individual, personal level from its highest potential, and then how that will impact the collective at large. You know, Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror, can't change anything out there unless we change it within ourselves and see it within ourselves first. So these energies are pointing to all this kind of awareness, observations, which is all Aquarius, and Leo, heart center, heart energy, heart activation, love, openness. And that's where I will leave it for today. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I hope these comments and tips were useful, and I hope that when you sit down and look at your chart, you're able to identify what I said about the eclipses. You know, have very specific themes. They bring in the polarity of Aquarius, Leo, and Cancer, Capricorn this year. And so have a look at those houses in your birth chart and go back to the beginning of the year when we had the first eclipse, which was a lunar eclipse in Aquarius. 31st of January it was this year. So go back that far and trace back what was going on. It's actually good to keep a journal, you know, or a diary if you're interested in following eclipses, but not only eclipses, other transits, all sorts of things going on, you know, in the world of astrology, in the birth chart and so forth, because we do tend to forget, you know, dates and events and things like that. And I'm big on that because I do rectifications, and rectification needs very precise dates and events, which whoever comes to me ends up finding that out. And yeah, not many people are aware of what's involved. But anyway, that's another story. Okay, thanks so much for watching, guys, and many blessings, much love, and take very good care of yourself during this eclipse season that we're in. It's pretty intense, and I didn't talk about myself at all, and I don't really want to, but I will say this, that it has impacted my life in quite a big way, this solar eclipse that we just had. Fortunately, though, the situation that arose for me, whilst it initially was quite awkward and uncomfortable and distressing, it produced a very good outcome, and that would be based on my ability to make clear decisions and reflect, and awareness and those sorts of things. Right, I can breathe. Okay, guys. See you soon. Much love, and thank you for watching. Leave comments and questions below. Contact me for a reading anytime if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye.